Battlefield 5. The beta's been and gone, and it's already left us with many high and low points. From the beautiful visuals supplied by the Frostbite engine to teething issues like glitches and variable performance, it's very much a work in progress. PS4 Pro and Xbox One X already got the full analysis treatment, but today the focus is on the most widely used consoles, the regular PS4 and Xbox One. Sure, a lot can change by its release in November, but where online competitive multiplayer is concerned, we wondered if the regular consoles could be at a disadvantage next to the more powerful Pro and X. Let's find out. Alright, these two consoles may be 5 years old now, but the Frostbite engine is in familiar territory here. The generation debuted with Battlefield 4 after all, giving us our very first face-off feature between PS4 and Xbox One. It worked out in PS4's favour in the end, with the console rendering the game at 900p, while Microsoft's console pushed a less impressive 720p image. Meanwhile, performance also had an advantage on Sony's system. For me and the Digital Foundry team, it was the first firm evidence we saw of the disparity in power between the two, and how comparisons would play out in the years ahead. Half a decade on then, Battlefield 5 is a significant release. Not only is it the numbered follow-up to that game, but it shows us how DICE's attitude to optimization has changed for these machines. With Pro and X on the market, the goalposts have moved somewhat. You'd think optimization would be tight, but clearly Battlefield 5's ambition goes beyond previous games, and there is a sense these enhanced models are getting a priority now. Certainly that's what the metrics tell us, but at the very least, visual quality holds up rather nicely, even on more limited hardware. Putting resolution aside, settings in general do take a hit on PS4 and Xbox One, and more so the latter, but it's not always a radical hit. Frame rate performance and image quality, something I'll touch on in a second, are the real trouble spots. But as far as the core visuals go, the texture assets are surprisingly close to what Pro and X are pushing. There are weak points for sure. Take the ambient occlusion for example. This is base Xbox One, and screen space shading looks very low res in dark alleyways, adding big clouds of shadow around the player's arms. This is a problem on base PS4 as well, while it's more accurate and refined on the higher end consoles. Perhaps it wouldn't be such a complaint if it wasn't for Pro and X, but now we know what is possible on the console front, it's hard to go back. Character shadows also inevitably look more dithered and lower quality on both base machines. It's nothing game breaking, and to an extent, the output resolution of 1080p on each means this isn't quite so distracting at range. Speaking of which, the resolutions on each will stand out. PS4 here for example runs at 1920 by 1080 with a dynamic res scaler that dials the pixel count down as needed based on load. What that translates to is a low point of 1280 by 720, which I did notice on transitions from the map view to gameplay. Intensive gameplay tends to lurk between the two numbers, and it can hit 1080p more regularly than a standard Xbox One. Now if we consider how far we've come in 5 years, from the fixed 900p figure in Battlefield 4, this is arguably the better turnout. It means PS4 gets the best image quality it can from each frame at any given moment, with 1920 by 1080 possible in less taxing spots on the map. Xbox One also benefits. Switching to that console, you'll notice image quality is degraded even further, especially if you're used to Xbox One X's playback at dynamic 4K. Here, we're relegated to a dynamic 1080p, but to be blunt, that's rarely hitting the top number. More often than not, this version runs at 1280 by 720, just the same as Battlefield 4 did all those years ago. There is some progress in that there is potential to go above that number, but the practical reality is, this is still the worst looking version of the bunch. The scaling is poor, and all those fine details on scaffolding, wires and fences become a flickering mess. Back in 2013, I was disappointed to have a native 720p pushed from a then next-gen console. With years of optimization to Frostbite, we are seeing improvement, but in this beta at least, 720p is still the predominant resolution for Xbox One. What does this mean then? Well, in practical terms, you'll know the score with Battlefield. This is a game with big maps and lots of detail on the horizon. Now the Rotterdam and Narvik maps in this beta won't go down as the series' biggest, but they're large enough to prove the point. On a base Xbox One, and to a lesser extent PS4, you simply can't pick out details as effectively far away compared to Pro and X. You share the same servers, travel in the same vehicles, jump into the same squads, but the fact is, these players will be getting a far worse picture than the rest, and it does affect playability. There are some side notes to this. Post-processing effects like motion blur on Xbox One and PS4 appear low resolution, and produce more dithering than the enhanced machines. It's always engaged in multiplayer too, so any panning movement creates a brittle, harsh smear as the frames are blended. Temporal anti-aliasing is in place much like Pro and X, and that produces ghosting at times too, adding to a messy impression of the world when you turn. And finally, there are artifacts on each base console similar to that of checkerboard rendering. It's a stippling effect on edges as you turn, and whether it's checkerboarding or simply a byproduct of the lower quality motion blur, it does further detract from the image. The beta code exists to iron out difficulties in the tech, and networking of course. DICE may well improve everything we're seeing here by November. I mean, the glitches we saw before are an issue. All of that I'm sure will be fixed. But in this state, and assuming the image quality stays as is, Battlefield 5 is far better experienced on a console like Xbox One X. Not only that, but you'll have a competitive advantage just from the sheer leap in visual fidelity you get from that machine. One disappointment that came from my Pro and X analysis was performance. In frame rate terms, neither really hit 60 FPS in the beta. Even so, the target there is ambitious anyway, with the 4K standard being a lofty target to hit from the off. On PS4 and Xbox One, there's a more realistic goal of 1080p, and seeing as these machines have dynamic res at their disposal, plus the benefits of DICE's years of working with each, I went in hoping frame rates would hold up. Being a beta, all this can change, but for now, it doesn't appear PS4 or Xbox One are much better. PS4 first then. This build runs at between 30 to 60 FPS and generally rests at an average of 44 FPS. Rotterdam and Narvik play out within the same range, and neither is particularly better or worse. Meanwhile, whether it's blizzards or rain or fog, the weather changes don't strain the machine to any greater degree, so the reality is you will see playback at 35 or 40 FPS while shooting down train tracks on Narvik, especially if they're congested with squad members. It's not pretty. 60 FPS is sometimes attainable, but so rarely at the times you need it. So how is that in the context of Sony's more powerful machine then? Well, PS4 playback is potentially worse than what I experienced on PS4 Pro. With no exact matching shots, it's hard to put a firm number on the difference. But in my experience, PS4 does appear to struggle more when pushed with more players on screen, and those drops to the 30 to 40 range are more common. If this is the case, it's really another reason to consider an upgrade to the enhanced machine, or even a PC if you just want to hit 60 FPS. These are the worst case scenarios of course. 64-player conquest maps in the beta are designed to stress the engine. In that way, PS4 should look and run better in the smaller maps, at nearer 60, and with the dynamic res having more breathing room to operate closer to 1080p. That's not something we have access to right now, and in the final build, we'll be able to get the exact matching stress tests in action to see the true differential between base and pro. With more aggressive dynamic res scaling in place, Xbox One is next in the limelight. What's surprising here is, while the range is also between 30 to 60 FPS, the overall pattern of performance in my tests can be better than a base PS4. It's rarely flattering. Locking to 60 FPS is off the cards in conquest mode, likely a byproduct of the CPU limitations these consoles have. But the drops on Xbox One are rarely languishing in the 30 to 40 FPS territory, and more often than not, it's in the higher 40 to 50 FPS bracket. It's perhaps explainable by the fact Xbox One has its CPU cores clocked at 1.75 GHz, a jump over the 1.6 on PS4, which would explain the advantage on Microsoft's machine in areas with lots of players. Benefit of the doubt is needed still. Even if we are only a few months from launch, the beta may be relying on an earlier build, designed for network stress testing. The glitches say as much, but we'll know for sure later in November. What's inescapable with any optimization push is that Xbox One X and PS4 Pro owners will be getting a better looking, better playing experience. It's something earlier Battlefield games with Pro and X support allow for, and it'll likely be the case in Battlefield 5. The power differential between the machines is wide enough that it's translating to an advantage, and so, if you're looking to take online play seriously on console, signs are pointing to the X version as your weapon of choice, and with Pro in close contention. Hopefully that answers all your questions on the beta. If you did find it useful, please let me know by liking or subscribing. And to know when a new video lands, hit the bell. For the source file to this analysis, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. And to get in direct contact with me or the team, feel free to use Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.